Um, I'll be honest with you. I never thought I'd be standing here saying this. I've spent most of my life keeping my thoughts quiet, choosing my words carefully, and speaking only when something truly mattered. But what happened to me last night, I can't keep that to myself. You see, sometimes God breaks through the silence in ways that shake us to our core. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't praying for a vision or fasting on a mountain. I was just an old man sitting alone in the dark, thinking about life, thinking about where this country, our country, has been and where it's headed. I was tired, maybe even a little discouraged, and that's when it happened. The room grew still, and the air seemed to change. A light appeared, not the kind that hurts your eyes, but a light that warms your soul. And there he was, Jesus. I knew it the moment I saw him. He didn't look like the paintings hanging in churches or the images you see in stained glass. No, he looked like a man who'd walked through every storm, carried every sorrow, yet still had eyes that held the kind of love you can't describe. When he said my name, it felt like he'd spoken to every part of me that had ever doubted, every part that had ever been afraid. He didn't come to condemn or frighten me. He came to show me something, to remind me of what's real. And friend, when I tell you it was real, I mean more real than the ground beneath my feet. I realized then how easily we drift away from what truly matters. We get caught up in the noise, the news, the arguments, the opinions. We scroll, we post, we react, and somewhere along the line we forget to feel. We forget to love. We forget that life was never meant to be about winning debates, but about healing hearts. As I sat there trembling, he said, I need you to bear witness. I didn't understand it at first. I'm not a preacher. I've never been one. But maybe that's the point. God doesn't always choose the most qualified. He chooses the willing. He uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. That night, I realized that faith isn't about religion or ritual. It's about relationship. It's about listening when he speaks, even if what he says challenges everything you thought you knew. So here I am, telling you this story, not because I want attention, but because I believe God still speaks today. Maybe he's speaking to you through this story. Maybe he's reminding you that no matter how dark the night gets, light still breaks through. That the same Jesus who met me in that quiet room wants to meet you right where you are in your doubts and your struggles and your fears, because he hasn't given up on America. He hasn't given up on you. It was late. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts a little too clearly. I was sitting alone, thinking about life, about how the world has changed, about the noise that never seems to stop anymore. I wasn't looking for anything divine that night. I was just trying to make sense of it all, the division, the confusion, the loss of peace that seems to have settled into people's hearts. And then something happened that words can barely hold. The air shifted, the room grew still, and a chill ran through me, not the kind that frightens you, but one that lets you know something sacred is near. And then came the light. It didn't come from the lamp or the window. It simply was, soft, golden, alive. And in the midst of it stood a man. I didn't need to ask who he was. I knew. Jesus. He wasn't radiant like the paintings I'd seen. He wasn't hovering or glowing. He looked human, worn even. His clothes were simple, his presence humble. Yet his eyes, those eyes, held eternity. They were filled with both love and sorrow, like he'd seen every joy and every heartbreak this world could offer. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My heart pounded in my chest. And then he said my name. Just that, my name. But when he spoke it, it was as if he was calling every broken piece of me back into place. You know, sometimes God meets us in the most unexpected ways. Not in the thunder or the earthquake, but in the stillness when everything else has gone quiet enough for his voice to reach us. That night I realized something. We often wait for miracles in the daylight, but God does some of his best work in the dark. Jesus didn't lecture me. He didn't come with anger or judgment. He looked tired, yes, but his love was unshaken. And in that moment, I could feel his heart for this world, for our world. I saw the weight of humanity's pain reflected in his face, and yet there was still hope in his eyes. That's what moved me most, that even after all we've done, he hasn't given up on us. When you encounter that kind of love, you can't go back to ordinary life. I sat there, overwhelmed, knowing that I was seeing something far bigger than myself. And maybe that's what faith really is, recognizing that in the middle of our chaos, heaven still reaches down. Even when we've lost our way, even when the world feels cold and divided, the light still comes. And sometimes it stands right in front of you. When Jesus took my hand that night, everything around me seemed to fade. My living room was still there, the same old chair, the same ticking clock, but somehow I wasn't just in that room anymore. It felt like time had folded in on itself. Suddenly, I could see things not through my eyes, but through his. He showed me a vision of America as it truly is, not the one we like to imagine, but the one we've quietly become. And friend, what I saw broke my heart. I saw a nation that had lost its way, streets filled with people, yet everyone walking alone, heads down, eyes glued to screens, hearts empty, families sitting under the same roof but worlds apart. Children growing up with every kind of entertainment, yet starving for love and attention. Neighbors who used to wave across fences now argue across comment sections. You could feel it, the loneliness, the bitterness, the exhaustion of a people who had forgotten how to be kind. Jesus showed me the greed that has crept into our souls, how we measure success by what we own instead of who we are, how we chase what glitters and ignore what truly matters. We've built towers of achievement, but the foundation beneath them is cracking. We've made idols out of wealth, status, and politics, and we wonder why our peace keeps slipping through our fingers. Then he turned my eyes toward the churches, and that's when it hit me hardest. I saw pulpits where power had replaced prayer. I saw congregations gathered in grand buildings but empty of compassion. Faith, once a fire that changed lives, had become a performance, a show to impress rather than a calling to serve. We've turned worship into a brand, sermons into slogans, and devotion into division. Instead of being known by our love, we've become known by our arguments. As I stood there in that vision, I realized something. This wasn't about pointing fingers, it was about opening eyes. Because every time we choose pride over humility, every time we choose comfort over conviction, every time we choose me over we, the light in this world dims just a little more. But even in that brokenness, I could sense something deeper. Jesus wasn't showing me this to condemn. His eyes, those eyes were full of sorrow, yes, but also mercy. He wasn't saying, "Look how far you've fallen." He was saying, "Look how far you could rise if you remembered who you are." Maybe that's the lesson for all of us today. It's not too late. The same God who sees the division also sees the potential for healing. The same nation that's lost its faith can find it again. But it begins not with institutions, not with politics. It begins with one heart turning back to love. Because that's where revival always starts, in the quiet decision of a single soul to choose light again. When Jesus showed me what the future could look like, it wasn't some distant fantasy or science fiction movie. It felt real, too real. I saw an America that had forgotten its soul. Streets were busy, but hearts were empty. People lived side by side, yet no one truly knew each other. Families existed under one roof, but lived in separate worlds, each person lost in the glow of their own screens. You could feel it in the air, a loneliness so thick it was almost visible. Children growing up without laughter echoing through their homes. Parents chasing success but missing the simple moments that build love. It was a world connected by technology but completely disconnected from compassion. I saw a generation weighed down by anxiety, their eyes tired before they'd even lived their lives. Young men and women scrolling endlessly, trying to find worth in a world that told them they weren't enough. Their hearts were restless, their spirits medicated, their dreams numbed by fear and comparison. And in that vision, I could almost hear Jesus whisper, "This is what happens when people forget where their hope comes from." Then he showed me the land itself, the rivers running dry, the forests gasping for air, the earth we were given to protect slowly dying from neglect. It wasn't just nature that was breaking, it was the reflection of our hearts. When we stop caring for creation, it's often because we've stopped caring for the Creator. When we forget gratitude, we lose reverence for everything around us. But what shook me most wasn't the destruction, it was the emptiness. I saw a democracy that had become hollow, a nation going through the motions without believing in the purpose behind them. People voted, spoke, and debated, but without faith in anything beyond themselves. Churches stood tall but silent, their lights dimmed not by persecution but by apathy. Faith wasn't outlawed, it was simply forgotten. It was a world where people had learned to live without love, where cynicism replaced compassion and noise replaced truth. The saddest part, most didn't even notice what they'd lost. They had built their lives around comfort and control, but their souls were starving. As I stood there in that vision, I felt tears run down my face. I thought, is this really where we're headed? But then I felt the quiet voice of hope, gentle, steady, unwavering, remind me, it doesn't have to be this way. Every generation has the chance to turn back, to rebuild, to choose love again. The future isn't written in stone, it's written in our hearts, in the choices we make today. And if we start now, if we return to kindness, to faith, to each other, then maybe, just maybe, that vision will never come to pass. I remember standing there in that vision, tears streaming down my face. What I had seen was almost too heavy to bear, the loneliness, the brokenness, the emptiness of a nation that had forgotten its heart. I looked at Jesus, and I could barely speak. My voice trembled as I asked, "Why are you showing me this?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with those eyes, eyes that carried both the sorrow of every human mistake and the mercy of every second chance. Then, in a voice as gentle as a whisper and as powerful as thunder, he said, "Because it doesn't have to be this way." Those words hit me like a wave. It was as if hope itself had reached down and lifted my chin. He said, "There's still time. There's still a chance to change the story. But people need to see. They need to remember what truly matters before it's too late." And right then I understood something that changed me forever. God never shows us what's wrong to shame us. He shows us to save us. When He reveals the brokenness, it's not to condemn, it's to call us home. You know, sometimes in life we get so used to the darkness that we forget what light looks like. We see anger and division on every screen and we start to think that's normal, but it's not. That's not who we're meant to be. God created us for connection, for compassion, for community. When Jesus said, "It doesn't have to be this way," I realized He wasn't just talking about America, He was talking about all of us. Every one of us has a part in writing the next chapter. Every one of us carries a light that can break through the shadows around us. He told me, "You must bear witness, tell people what you've seen, remind them of who they are." And maybe that's what the world needs now, people who are not afraid to speak truth in love, to remind others that there's still good in this world worth fighting for. Because when one heart wakes up, others follow. When one person chooses forgiveness over bitterness, peace starts to ripple outward. As I stood there, the tears began to dry, and a quiet strength filled my chest. I realized hope is not fragile, it's powerful. It's the spark that turns nations around, the seed that grows into revival. the whisper that tells you, try again. And that's what Jesus was saying. It's not too late. It never is. The story isn't over, and as long as there's breath in our lungs, we can still choose a different ending. It was sometime after 2 a.m. The world outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums like a heartbeat. I was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in my hands, still trying to process everything I'd just seen. My heart was heavy, my spirit shaken. I remember whispering, Lord, why show me all of that if it's already too late? And then without a sound, without a warning, he was there again. Jesus. No bright light this time, no thunder from heaven, just standing beside me, as real as the reflection in the glass. And in that simple, holy silence, he said, You're troubled. I told him, Of course I am. You just showed me the end of everything I love. He looked out the window with me, as if he could see beyond the darkness, and said gently, That wasn't the future, Clint. That was a future one possible path if hearts don't change. His words settled deep in me. Then why show it to me? I asked. He turned to me and said, 'Cause comfort is the enemy of change. People don't wake up when they're comfortable. They wake up when they see what's at stake. Those words pierced my soul. I thought about how easy it is for us to fall asleep in our own lives, settled into routines, distracted by screens, lulled by convenience. We stop asking big questions. We stop listening for that still, small voice. And before we know it, we've drifted far from the shore, wondering why life feels empty. But Jesus reminded me that sometimes truth has to shake us before it can save us. He said, I walked your earth for 33 years. I healed, I taught, I loved, but still people chose fear over faith, pride over peace. Yet I never gave up on them. And I'm not giving up now. His voice carried such grace, such power. I realized that what he was offering wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation to awaken. Maybe that's what this moment in history is all about. Maybe the restlessness in our world, the unease we all feel deep down, it's not just chaos, it's a calling. God is trying to get our attention again. He's saying, don't get too comfortable where you are. Don't mistake stillness for peace. There's work to be done. There's truth to be told. That night I understood that revelation isn't given to scare us. It's given to stir us. It's meant to pull us out of our apathy and remind us that the future isn't fixed. It's shaped by the choices we make today. And as I stood there, the moonlight spilling across the floor, I felt something new rising inside me. Not fear, not despair, but purpose. Because when truth confronts comfort, that's when transformation begins. When Jesus spoke again that night, his words didn't thunder, they flowed like peace itself. He turned to me and said, Clint, everything I've ever taught comes down to something simple, love one another. And for a moment the room felt weightless, like the air itself was listening. I thought about how often we complicate faith, how we debate, divide, and draw lines in the sand, when all along God's command was so clear. Love one another. That's the foundation. That's the power that changes everything. He said, take care of each other. Don't let fear and hatred rule your hearts. And it struck me, how often do we let fear make our choices for us? Fear of being wrong, fear of being rejected, fear of losing control. But fear and faith can't live in the same heart. One always drives the other out. Jesus wasn't just talking about a feeling. He was calling us to action, to love, not just the people who agree with us, but the ones who don't. To care for the forgotten, the unseen, the ones this world pushes aside. As he spoke, I could feel something changing inside me. Compassion wasn't just an emotion, it was a power. Mercy wasn't weakness, it was strength. Grace wasn't something you earned, it was something you gave freely, because you'd received it first. And I realized If the world could rediscover those three, compassion, mercy, grace, it could heal. It could rebuild. It could rise again. He told me, "You still have the power to choose differently." That sentence echoed in my soul, because it reminded me, no matter how far we've drifted, we can always turn around. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe the world around you feels cold or chaotic. But God never writes a story He can't redeem. Every new sunrise is another invitation to begin again, to speak kindness where there's bitterness, to forgive where there's hurt, to lift someone when the world pushes them down. That night, as Jesus' voice faded into silence, I felt the message settle deep in my heart. The answer to division isn't another argument, it's love. The cure for despair isn't control, it's compassion. The way forward isn't found in fear, it's found in grace. You and I can't fix the whole world, but we can start with the person right next to us. So today, wherever you are, remember this. The world doesn't change when someone else decides to do better. It changes when you do. When you choose mercy over judgment, when you choose to see through love instead of anger, that's when heaven touches earth. That's when hope begins again. When Jesus looked at me that night, there was a weight in His eyes, not a burden, but a calling. He said, "You've spent your life telling stories, Clint. That's what I made you for. So now, tell this story." At first I hesitated. I thought, me? Why me, Lord? I'm just an old storyteller. I've played heroes on screen, but I'm no preacher, no prophet. He smiled, and in that moment, I understood something powerful. God doesn't always choose the strongest or the loudest. He chooses the willing. He doesn't look for perfect people. He looks for people who will say, yes. Jesus said, "You do what you've always done. Speak truth. Use the gift I gave you. Tell them it's not too late." And those words lit something inside me. Because the truth is, we live in a world full of noise, opinions, headlines, anger. But what the world is starving for isn't more noise, it's truth. The kind that pierces through fear, that reminds us who we are and who we're meant to be. He told me, change doesn't start from the top down. It starts in living rooms, in conversations, in the quiet courage of ordinary people. And I thought about that, how God has always worked through everyday hearts. It was a fisherman who carried His gospel, a shepherd who became a king, a carpenter's son who changed eternity. Maybe that's the beauty of it. You don't need a title or a platform to make a difference. You just need the courage to speak light into dark places. I asked him, but what if they don't listen? He said, some won't, but some will, and those few will move mountains. That's how change has always happened, one heart awakened, one voice at a time. And maybe that's what God is saying to you today. You may not stand on a stage or lead a nation, but your words, your kindness, your faith, they ripple farther than you can see. As he spoke, I could feel his love for this broken world. Tell them to choose love over hate, he said. Tell them unity is still possible. Tell them hope is not gone. And it hit me, this wasn't just a mission for me, it was a message for all of us. Every person has a platform, even if it's just the circle around them. Every voice can echo grace. Every act of compassion can plant a seed of change. So here's what I know now. When God gives you truth, you can't keep it to yourself. You don't need to shout it, you just need to live it. Tell it through kindness, tell it through courage, tell it through love. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear it. And if enough of us do that, if enough of us choose truth over fear, then maybe, just maybe, the world will remember what light looks like again. When I finally said yes to what Jesus asked of me, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I sat there for a long time, staring into the quiet dark, thinking about what it would cost. I knew people would laugh. They'd say I'd lost my mind, that age had gotten to me, that this was all some strange dream. But I also knew something deeper. When God calls you to speak, you can't stay silent. Truth has a way of burning in your chest until you let it out. So I made a decision right there. I'd rather be misunderstood telling the truth than comfortable living a lie. I realized America's greatest struggle isn't political, it's spiritual. It's not about who sits in the White House, but who reigns in our hearts. We've forgotten the simplest things that make us human: kindness, humility, compassion. Somewhere along the way, we traded listening for shouting, love for pride, and faith for fear. You can see it everywhere. People quick to argue, slow to forgive. We've built walls around our hearts and called it protection, but what it's really done is isolate us. And the truth is, a nation isn't healed by new laws or louder voices. It's healed by changed hearts. I thought about all the times I've seen ordinary people do extraordinary good: a stranger paying for someone's meal, a neighbor showing up when a family's lost everything, a child holding their parent's hand in the hospital. That's where God still moves, not in the headlines, but in the hearts of everyday people choosing love. That's the real power we've forgotten. Not the power to dominate, but the power to care. We can't control what happens in Washington, but we can control what happens in our homes, our communities, our churches. We can't fix every division overnight, but we can start with the person next to us. We can put down our phones, look someone in the eye, and say, "You matter." That's how revival begins, not with policy, but with people. That night, I felt a peace settle in me like I hadn't felt in years. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I understood now that the light doesn't need permission to shine. It just needs someone willing to hold it up. And maybe that's what Jesus was asking of me and of all of us, to be that light, to live with kindness when it's easier to be cold, to speak hope when the world feels hopeless, to love when it makes no sense to. Because if even one heart turns back toward goodness, if even one person remembers what we were created for, then maybe that's enough to start healing this land. As I came to the end of that long, holy night, one truth settled deep in my heart. Jesus wept for America, but he hasn't given up on her. That image has stayed with me ever since. The Son of God, standing in quiet sorrow, not because he's angry, but because he loves us too much to watch us keep destroying each other. You could feel the heartbreak in his silence, but also the hope in his eyes. And that's when I knew if he hasn't given up, then neither can we. I thought about the world we live in today, how easy it is to lose faith in people. We see anger everywhere, on our screens, in our conversations, in our streets, and it's tempting to believe that kindness has gone extinct. But Jesus reminded me that darkness only wins when light refuses to shine. Hope only dies when we stop choosing it. So he whispered to my heart, "Tell them to choose differently. Choose love over hate, unity over division, mercy over pride." It sounds simple, but maybe that's why we overlook it. The truth is, the answers we're searching for aren't hidden in some grand secret. They're right in front of us, waiting to be lived. Love is still the most powerful force on earth. It heals wounds no law can fix, restores bridges no debate can rebuild, and revives hearts that the world has written off. But love takes courage. It means forgiving those who hurt you, listening when it's easier to shout, believing the best when cynicism feels safer. Unity doesn't mean we'll always agree. It means we remember that what binds us is greater than what divides us. And hope, real hope, isn't blind optimism. It's a choice to see light when everything around you looks dark. That's the call Jesus left with me that night. Not to preach a sermon, not to stir fear, but to ignite faith. To remind us that this country, this world, this generation, it's not beyond redemption. The odds may look impossible, but so did every miracle God ever performed. Every great revival began when ordinary people decided to love again. So, my friend, maybe this is our moment. Maybe you're listening right now because something in your heart knows it's time. Time to forgive, to rebuild, to reach across the line and hold a hand instead of pointing a finger. Time to believe again, because no matter what the headlines say, it's not too late. It never is. The story of America isn't over, it's just waiting for us to write the next chapter. And the pen is in our hands. So choose differently. Choose love. Choose unity. Choose hope. That's how heaven starts right here, one heart at a time.